Okay, today I wanted to make a video about DJI color science, let's say. So I borrowed a bunch of cameras from DJI. I've got the Ronin 4D with the 6K sensor on it. They sent over the 8K sensor. I've got the Mavic 4 Pro. I've even got the little Osmo Pocket 3. Now, full disclosure, I'm really just making this video in order to sell you on my DJI LUTs. But in the process of making them, which I've already made them and they're live now, link in description, I thought, some of this is kind of interesting. I wonder if people would like to see the sort of discoveries I make while trying to make the LUTs of like what's different between the colors of all these different cameras. And maybe that might be useful to you, especially if you have other DJI cameras that I didn't cover and that kind of thing. Okay, so let's just jump straight into Resolve here. I'm using DaVinci Resolve Studio 20. And I have 7 clips. The first one, and all the labels in the top left corner here, so you'll see it says Sony Alpha 7 IV. This is more of just a reference image. I've spent the most, this is the camera I use for main shot, so I spent the most time tweaking this one to be as perfect as possible. So when I need sort of a reference to cut back to, I always use this one. And then we've got 6 clips from DJI cameras. We've got the Ronin 4D 6K, the Ronin 4D 8K, the Mavic 4 Pro in its D-Log mode, the Mavic 4 Pro using a tele lens, which had a difference in color, which is why I'm showing that as an example. And then the Mavic 4 Pro in the D-Log M mode, which I think is worth doing because D-Log M has some advantages in dynamic range in certain situations. And also, for some users, it is an easier workflow. So I think it's worth including, and there was requests for it as well. And then we have the Osmo Pocket 3, which also uses D-Log M, and is worth comparing to the Mavic 4 Pro because of how similar the manufacturer LUTs are there. None of these clips I just showed you have anything on them right now. They're in their log state. And so we're going to work with them using the manufacturer LUTs. You'll see the obstacles that I run into, which is what made me want to make LUTs in the first place. Let's start with the Ronin 4D 6K. Now, my face is covering where I keep my LUTs in Resolve, so I will show you here. I have downloaded the ZenMuse X9 D-Log Direct 709 LUT directly from DJI. I also have the Osmo Pocket 3 LUT, the D-Log M 709 and then both of the Mavic 4 Pro LUTs, the D-Log M Direct 709 and the D-Log Direct 709. These are the LUTs I'm going to mention when I say I'm using the manufacturer LUT. So on the Ronin 4D 6K, I'm going to put the ZenMuse X9 D-Log Direct 709 LUT on, and we can take a look at it. Now, when you just throw it on at first, you think, yeah, doesn't look too bad. But let's first apply it to the 8K sensor as well. So I'm going to put the same LUT on there because unfortunately in this case, there's only one LUT for both sensors. And right away, you'll notice that there's an improvement on the 8K. Now, these clips have already been white balanced. Something I should say about the white balance tool in camera on the 4D is that it's not great. You can't do a specific white balance box on your target. It's kind of more of an evaluative of the whole scene. Now, if you have a zoom lens, you could zoom in on the target and maybe help, but you can't keep your frame and say, oh, and white balance over here. And so the results aren't always great, but specifically, it seems to need to be greened up in post. I find that it comes out too pink. So these clips have already been white balanced to a certain extent. What I like to do when I check before I work with LUTs to make sure that we're okay is I'll use this little dropper here and I'll choose show RGB picker value. And if all 3 values are about the same, so in this case 95, 96, 96, let's check the 6K, 96, 97, that tells me that it's pretty neutral. If it was, out of whack, if we, for instance, did this and you put it over here, you would see red is 150, green is 88. That's no good. So I will comment on white balance as we go about the experience aspect of it, but all of these clips have already been fixed in post. Now, if I switch back and forth, something you'll notice and something I appreciated about the 8K is that the color on the 8K is significantly improved over the 6K. Now, I know there is quite a bit of time between those two sensors, but it is much better. So here's the 6K, looks all right. But if we switch to the 8K, you can see there's a lot better tonality in the skin tones, and the skin tones are more correct in terms of their hue than the 6K version. All right, now let's talk about the scopes for a minute. So if you're new to a vector scope, let me explain a little bit about how it works. So on the color chart here, you can see that they're the bigger boxes, so red, magenta, blue in the corners, cyan, green, and yellow. Those 6 chips are also reflected on the vector scope, which always has red, magenta, blue, cyan, green, and yellow. And in a perfectly accurate image, if I switch over to the Sony one, you can see that the chips should line up pretty much with those boxes and should be pretty much inside of them. I only like to go just touching them. I find that when I'm inside of them, it's a little bit too saturated, a little bit broadcasty. And so I like to just tone it down just a little bit. And when I make my LUTs, I also tone them down. If you want to punch it up, it's easy to punch up and everything will stay relatively accurate as you increase it. But if we look at the 6K, we can see that some of them are, like, I would say the red, magenta, blue side is okay, but the green, yellow, cyan is out of whack. The yellow is completely undersaturated, so is the cyan, and the green is arguably too saturated. This line here is the skin tone line, and you can see that the skin tones are also leaning a little bit more on the red side. Let's take a look at the 8K. Better. The yellow has a bit more saturation. The skin tones are perfectly on the skin tone line. There's a bit better balance between the colors. Again, you want almost like a perfect hexagon, right? So the 8K is better, but still not perfect. And also because of the differences between the two cameras, you can see as I switch back and forth, they should necessitate two different LUTs because they don't take in color the same way. Another common comment I get is, well, I just use CSTs and Resolve. It shouldn't have this issue. So let's go ahead and put on a color space transform instead. And we're going to go up here and we're going to choose the DJI D-Gamut and DJI D-Log, and we'll put it to Rec 709. And now I can switch back and forth between the CST and the LUT. And I would say in some ways the CST is a little bit better. In other ways, it's just kind of a more saturated version of the DJI LUT, but they both still have the same weakness where the cyan is undersaturated, the yellow is undersaturated. And in this case, I would say that they might have lost the plot a little bit with the skin tones in the CST. My point here is just that CSTs aren't the solution either. It's not like LUTs can be wonky, but CSTs are perfectly color accurate. Some CSTs are better than others, some LUTs are better than others, but none of them have ever really been perfectly color accurate for me. So let's stick with the manufacturer LUTs for now, and let's jump over here, which is the Mavic 4 Pro D-Log. So I'm going to throw the official Mavic 4 Pro D-Log LUT on. And if you just had the same reaction to me at first, which is, oh wow, that one looks really good, I agree. I think the Mavic 4 Pro has sort of the best color that DJI has achieved so far. Also, the white balance on the Mavic 4 Pro was excellent. This didn't require any white balance adjustments. I mean, I did auto white balance on the drone, but I didn't have to affect it in post. And look, 99, 99, 99. It's perfect. It's so really, really good. If we look at the Vectorscope, we can see that we have more even saturation throughout each of the hues. Kind of undersaturated overall, but still, this is a really good image. And I think even just adding a little bit of contrast can give you like a pretty good look just with just using the manufacturer LUT. So good job on the Mavic 4 Pro D-Log LUT. There are some tweaks. We still need to sort of bolster the cyan and the yellow and maybe relax the green possibly a little bit. And I've done all that with my LUTs, which I'll show you. But yeah, Mavic 4 Pro, good white balance, really good color on the D-Log. However, if you switch to the tele lenses on the Mavic 4 Pro, and again, they just have the same LUT. That, as far as I know, they don't have a telephoto LUT. You get a similar shape, but it's even less saturated than the wide lens. So if you're going to do this yourself, you're probably going to need to saturate the tele lenses more than you would the wide lenses. Just something to keep in mind. But that's really the only difference, because something I can give credit to, and with all the DJI LUTs, they're really good at this, is if we look at the waveform, this X pattern over here, that's created by these 11 different, luminance patches from white to black. And they can help you position when you make a LUT or when you expose to know, okay, where should my white and black fall? And I think, honestly, the white is supposed to be, like when you go full broadcast mode, it's supposed to be like 90%. So it should be up around this 896 line. And then the blacks, depending again on how you're delivering, have different levels, but they should be pretty low. Now, I don't usually try to get the whites all the way to 90% because I find that can be pretty harsh for people shooting skies and stuff like that. But I do tend to bump them a little bit higher than this. But the praise that I should give to DJI is that this X shape is really good. Often you'll see it where the X kind of curves off, or the roll off is too strong, or middle gray is out of whack. Speaking of middle gray, by the way, DJI recommends with D-Log that middle gray is exposed to 40%, which would be, I think, 408 on the 10-bit code values, which each one of these little hash marks between, I think, is 32. It's like worth 32 more code value. So I'd say we should aim for about one notch above the 384. And you can see this one's exposed correctly. They've all been corrected to have the same exposure for each one. And so then when you put the LUT on, you can see that your middle gray doesn't really change. It stays there. And then all that happens is you're expanding your highs and your lows. And you should have a nice looking X. And DJI does a really good job of that. And if we click back through the other shots and you look at the X over here, you can see that on the 6K, on the 8K, and on the Mavic 4 Pro, they're all very consistent with their luminance, which is excellent. Especially the hue Luma, which we'll get more into the weeds on that in just a minute. Let's finish up the rest of our clips here. So here we have the Mavic 4 Pro with D-Log M, and there's a specific LUT for that one. Let's throw that on. And what I like about the D-Log M is, well, again, on the waveform, it's excellent. But also, this is definitely a fully saturated image. You could argue a bit oversaturated. Now you can see why I don't typically like to put the dots all the way in the boxes, or definitely not past them, because you do get sort of a hypercolor thing going on. So I'd probably reel that in a bit. Let's just pull the saturation down to where the other ones were. Say something like that. It definitely does lean on the pink side. We can see in the skin tones here that we're much closer to magenta, and the overall image has a bit of a pink vibe. But other than that, I do like, let me reset the saturation back to default. I do like that most of the dots are much more lined up with their respective hues where they should be. Just a little bit too saturated, a little bit too magenta, but a pretty good job. And then let's jump over to the Osmo Pocket 3, which is also D-Log M, and it also has its own unique LUT, but there is something to point out about that. So let's put this one on. So my first reaction here is, oh wow, that looks really good. The skin tones look really good. And they do. And if we look here, you can see now the red, magenta, and blue, none of those are oversaturated at all. It's more just the cyan, green, and yellow that are oversaturated. Interestingly, on the Mavic 4 Pro, it was the other direction. The yellow, green, and cyan weren't so bad, but the magenta and red were way oversaturated. On the Osmo Pocket 3, it's the reverse, which creates, I think, a better looking face by having the red in a better spot and not having the skin tone lean too far to the magenta. But you would still want to reel in the yellow, green, and cyan. And so really, if you wanted a sleazy way just to do the Osmo Pocket 3, throw on the LUT. I probably wouldn't broadly adjust the saturation. I think what I would do is I would go to hue saturation. I would probably put a mark, let's say here, close to the yellow, further away from the red, but before the yellow. And then I'd probably also put a mark here, one close to the cyan, but just outside of it. I'd say if you just made sort of a shape like this that covers from the yellow to the cyan, you'd be in pretty good shape. The green actually could have a little bit more to it, so it's actually more of like a weird W. But then that'd be pretty good. And then I would just adjust. I would go back to my hue versus hue, and again, I'd probably put a point like here and here, and then I would just swing this just a little bit down this way, which makes the skin a little bit less magenta, and even just a little bit, like I did a -5. I would probably do something like that, and then now I would say this is a pretty nicely tuned up image. The D-Log M LUTs are quite easy to work with. There is something worth pointing out though. Let me reset what we did here. So if instead of putting the Osmo Pocket 3 LUT on the Osmo Pocket 3, let's put the Mavic 4 Pro D-Log M LUT on the Osmo Pocket 3. Did you see the difference? Osmo Pocket 3, Mavic 4 Pro LUT. Pocket 3 LUT, Mavic LUT. The color doesn't really change at all. In fact, look at the Vectorscope as we do that again. Before, after, before, after. The color doesn't really change much, but if you look at the waveform, before, after, that's all that was really tweaked, is the luminance. Again, it seems like DJI really tries hard with the luminance values of their LUTs, but doesn't tweak the color as much as I wish that they would, because if you look at these two cameras, you can see that the color, the saturation of different values is quite a bit different. The LUTs should be more involved in the color than they are, the differences between them. I got a couple more cool things that I want to show you, but before that, if you've been watching this and you're like, this seems like a lot to just get color accurate drone footage, you could use my LUTs, like I said, but if you don't want to do that, you just want the easiest possible way, you could always download your color accurate drone footage from the sponsor of today's video, Storyblocks. Storyblocks is a stock media platform that offers unlimited downloads of diverse and high quality content for one predictable subscription cost. Choose a monthly or annual plan and enjoy a library of over 1 million HD and 4K video files, images, and motion graphics templates, including a continually expanding inventory of DaVinci Resolve templates that I've come to really appreciate. And more importantly, all of those assets are created by real people sharing real experiences. Because in this age of artificial intelligence, where an increasing volume of what we see online is generated by AI, Storyblocks is proud to be providing authentic stock content created by actual artists that AI can't replicate. Plus, anything you download from Storyblocks is 100% royalty-free with clear-cut licensing, so you can focus on creating, not worrying about usage rights. The platform is incredibly easy to use, and the library is frequently restocked with commission content based on customer demand to ensure you'll have access to files that are not only high quality, but fresh and diverse. And now, you'll get an extra 3 months free when you sign up for an annual plan. Just go to storyblocks.com/undone or click the link in the description to take advantage of this limited time offer. So if we go to my reference image here, which is the Sony Alpha 7 IV, do you see on the waveform? So yeah, this is something that a lot of LUT makers miss, especially by third-party LUTs, CSTs often, these things are all out of whack. You can't just line up the hues, even at the saturation and say done, because the luminances, the brightness of those hues can be off, and our eyes are more sensitive to brightness than it is to saturation in many cases. So that's a huge component of accuracy. And on the waveform, you can see the different sort of color chips. So see, there's like green and yellow ones over here, goes across these cyan ones. Down here, you'll see some purples, magentas, and blues. That's how bright they are, like how high up and down they are. So let's go to the Ronin 40 6K. First of all, if you switch back and forth between the Alpha 7 IV and the Ronin 40 6K, we can say, actually, they have a pretty similar arrangement of the luminance values for the hues, and that's excellent. But let me show you on the curves down here. So if we go to hue versus luma, let's move the yellow up like this. So if we do this, you see how now the yellow is much more bright? And now look at the image. It looks absolutely terrible. Now, usually you don't see this much of a swing on a CST or a LUT, but they can be off a little bit. Let's say this one was up a little bit. I'm just going to go through and just do some random stuff like this. On the Vectorscope, if I reset this back and forth like that, you'll see the Vectorscope isn't really changing. So you might think, okay, everything's dialed in perfectly. Color accuracy is great. But look at the image itself. Look what's happening. See how all the hues to your eye look so different? It looks like completely different rainbow, so to speak. That's the importance of getting the right luminance values. And then ultimately, after working with it for a long time, I usually end up with something like this. This is the Ronin 40 8K, and you can see my hue versus luma curve that I had to make in order to fix all luminance values. And then now, if you look at the waveform over here and compare it to my Alpha 7 IV reference image, you can see that the relative positions of all of the hues on how bright or dark they are is about the same. And that means that when you zoom in on just the color chart here and you flip back and forth, that it should look like pretty much the same image. Also, this will highlight another thing that I provide when I provide my LUTs, which is sort of an LC version and a regular version. This would be the regular version. You can see now on the waveform, if you remember I said that I like to brighten up the whites, but not all the way to 90%, and I add enough contrast. So I still keep the shape of the X, but I make it go a little bit brighter, a little bit darker to give sort of a finished, you just put this LUT on and it's done in one step. But if you didn't want such a contrasty image, I also offer, so I have a custom curve here, which I just disabled. I also offer this version, which is the LC version. And you can see that all of the colors are still in the correct sort of hexagon, but now, and the luminances are all perfect. It's just, it follows more of the default X pattern that DJI has based on neutral exposure. So this would mean with this LUT, my LC LUT, you would still get the same perfect color, but then in post, you would have to go in and you have a few options. You can just sort of, crudely add contrast. And if you do that, you can see, if you look at the Vectorscope, you can see that as we increase or decrease contrast, the colors are still staying in the same shape that they should. And then you as well could go in, if you wanted to just sort of increase your white point, you could even just do this and just bring up the image overall like that. And that was just, all I did was slide the white point over and increase the contrast. And if I give you a before and after, this can be done to the LC image, or if you don't want to bother with that, you can just get the full version, which looks like this. Both come included in the same package. So if I go through and I add my LUT that I made to each one of these now, check this out. All very similar, and all very similar to the Sony Alpha 7 IV, which is the cool thing about my LUTs, is that if you get the DJI ones and the Sony ones, you should be able to cut that footage together with, same if you get my Lumix ones, whatever, like they should all cut together nicely. Something I did discover though, is that on the D-Log M version, look at my face on the Mavic 4 D-Log M and then the regular D-Log. See how much kind of sharper it is in the D-Log M? I think that the D-Log M is adding, it's possible it's adding more sharpness, maybe because it's a more finished look. So that's something that I didn't account for, and you just might want to take a look at that if you're intercutting footage between those two. Check and see if the sharpness is up already on the D-Log-M, and if not, there might be some kind of point where minus whatever on the D-Log-M equals default sharpness on D-Log. That might be something that needs to be experimented with. One other oddity that I wanted to point out has to do, it's probably only specific to me, but it's this purple hue that I have behind me on the pegboard. If you look at my Sony image, this is right. This purple here is correct. But if we look at the Ronin, the 6K and the 8K, it is less saturated and it leans a little bit more red. You can see here, I flip back and forth, just looking at the pegboard. As DJI went on, like more modern, they got better with it. So the Mavic 4 Pro is better, and the D-Log-M version is even better, and the Osmo Pocket 3 is pretty good. So the color science on DJI has actually improved over the years, which is great to see. I think that's everything that I wanted to cover. Again, I know this video was sort of heavily a bit of a sales channel for my LUTs, but I think that two things out of this. One, I hope that you gathered sort of the obstacles that I encounter and that you'll encounter when working with LUTs. I also hope maybe this is motivation to the manufacturers to maybe up their LUT game a little bit, although then I suppose that would put me out of business for what I'm doing with these. And maybe in the future, if this type of video is helpful to you, let me know in the comments if you found this useful or helpful at all. Maybe we can compile this and then make sort of an overall tier list of the different sort of color sciences of the different camera systems based on how much work needs to be done to bring them all to a neutral, accurate standpoint. And then we can rank them and get rid of all the nonsense of like, I think the color science of this is better, that's better. It's like, well, there's no think to it. These ones are better or worse. Maybe that's fun, a fun video to do, like color science tier list. And so again, to wrap up on a little bit of a praise to DJI, yeah, the hues and the saturations are a little bit wonky, but they've done really well and they're very consistent with the luminance, exposure value, and curves and that kind of thing, and also keeping the correct luminances for the respective hues. They've done really well in that regard. Some of the best I've seen. Okay, that's it. Hope this video was helpful. See you in the next one. All right. I'm done.